Welcome back to the Stoic Cellist. The two major concepts we have discussed are, first, don't worry about the future, and don't worry about what others are doing. Instead, only be a bit better than you were yesterday. And second, be a good friend to yourself, in order to break the self-abuse spiral caused by thwarted plans. This episode, I'm going to expand on some ideas from the first episode, particularly the idea of incremental progress and the importance of humility in this process. Remember when I discussed what it means to be just a bit better every day? An example statement was, what can I do in 10 minutes to make this a bit better? That wording was not idly chosen. Limiting the time you spend on a problem in one sitting actually helps solve it more quickly and more thoroughly. It takes into account the incremental nature of learning and improvement. One of the most important things I did for my ability to progress in practicing was to stop hurling myself at excerpts full tilt again and again, trying to play the finished product. It meant finding humility and accepting, without frustration, that my playing is not good enough, and that the work I had to do was based on how things are today, not where I want them to be in the future. What do I mean by that? Consider a marathon. It's a very long race, just over 42 kilometers, and it takes at least a few months of preparation. What do you think will happen if you try to train for it by running a full marathon right away? You'll probably end up collapsed on the side of the road, if not in the hospital. The next day you do this again, and with the same results. How do you think you will feel? If you throw yourself at a marathon with no preparation, it will feel, and actually be, impossible. While the negative results of hurling yourself at excerpts are certainly not as drastic as trying to run a marathon without training, the general results are the same. You will be frustrated by what seems to be impossible and unachievable. It's an integral part of the downward spiral discussed in the previous episode. Without a feeling of progress, you feel stuck and thwarted in your plans. Actually, taking an audition is similar to running a marathon. It's a day consisting of at least 3 rounds, typically starting as early as 8 a.m., and depending on the open position and number of applicants, it can last into the evening. It's grueling, to say the least. Preparation for this day isn't just about being able to play everything well. It's being so well prepared and resilient that you can't play the list badly, even if you're hungry and tired and cranky and just want to go home. Back to preparing for a marathon. How do you think one actually begins this daunting process? By running shorter distances, interspersed with walking intervals. You work your way up through longer and longer running intervals, gradually reducing how much you walk, until you can finally run a long distance without stopping or slowing down. It's a long and difficult process, but approached methodically, it is entirely possible. It's the same with preparing for an audition. If you just try harder when you can't run a marathon, you'll still fail. So it is with practicing. Without the humility to accept that you can't run a marathon now, you'll never be able to start the process in a constructive way. It seems obvious when talking about distance running, but strangely less so when discussing orchestra excerpts as a professional musician. You might say, I started studying at a young age. I have at least 2 advanced degrees and how many decades of practice under my belt, and I still can't play the opening bars of Beethoven's 5th second movement in tune? What's wrong with me? This arrogance and lack of humility is only going to bring you grief, as it did me. Having the humility to accept that you can't play the final product is the first critical step in this process. What does this mean when you actually sit down to practice? Simple. It means you accept that you aren't as good as you need to be, and that's not a bad thing. The only thing that you can do is be a bit better than you were yesterday, and that's exactly what you will do. How does this look on a practical level? Devote only a short time to one excerpt, 10 to 15 minutes at most. Pick one passage, bar, or even handful of notes that is troublesome, and play the whole excerpt once if you aren't sure what needs work. Then devote the time allotment to picking that passage apart. Intonation, hand position, shifting, string crossing, rhythms, everything. Be impossibly critical, but without self-abuse. Remember episode 2? It doesn't matter that you can't run the full marathon now. Stick to your program of intervals. Once the time allotment is spent, no matter how the excerpt feels, leave it for the day. Move on to the next one and repeat the process. It may feel as though you aren't accomplishing anything right away, but with this solid foundation you'll find that after a few weeks, and likely even sooner, you will have a much higher success rate playing the excerpt through. Here we are reaching the longer intervals of running. Start thinking in larger terms, in complete phrases, or the entire excerpt if it's short. Think more about how you're going to play it well, not just correctly. You'll play the excerpt through more often, but just as often you'll find yourself returning to specific passages and dissecting it as before. That's fine. This is some of the most difficult music we can play. Dissect as often and as deeply as necessary. Remember episode 1? Our only concern is where we are, right now, and what can be improved today. With humility, you will find this mindset. Unlike running, however, the goal is not to increase the length of your practicing intervals, but to decrease them. After a certain point, be it weeks or months or years, you'll find that you have embedded the excerpt so deeply that you can consistently play it to satisfaction on the first try with no preamble or messing about. This is the level of preparation that means you have a chance at audition success. This is a significant achievement. However, it's not the end of your efforts. Satisfaction is not perfection. In fact, perfection doesn't exist. Don't forget that no matter how much progress you make, there will always be things that can be better. It's also worth remembering that if you leave your excerpts for a few months or years, you'll need to repeat some work to get them back to where you want them. That's okay too. Today is the only day that matters. With faithful adherence to this process, you can't fail to improve. Some problems will simply melt away as though they never existed, while others will persist with stubborn difficulty. That's normal. Don't be discouraged by the problems that resist solving. You are uncovering the fundamental weaknesses in your playing, and this is a wonderful opportunity to address them in a way that will reduce and ameliorate their influence. Trust in your work. Be methodical and dispassionate in your analysis. Don't think months or weeks ahead to your audition. Look at yesterday, and think about how you can improve today. Be humble in your expectations. Don't mindlessly hurl yourself at problems, and only concern yourself with incremental progress. You can't fail to improve. You will move forward.